how do we communicate in our family? How do we fight fair, right? I mean, that is a skill to learn how to fight, how to argue in a way that is still healthy. This is an area where if you're struggling with some of these conversations about technology, you may be struggling to navigate some of these other very complex areas of parenthood. And behavioral health providers can really provide facilitation for those conversations. They can help do some of these things I'm recommending, like try to identify shared family values. This does not have to be something that parents are navigating alone.
I'm your host, Jason Hopkins, and today I have the honor of speaking with Dr. Andrea Maikovich-Fong. Dr. Maikovich-Fong is a board certified clinical health psychologist with extensive experience supporting children, teens, and families. She earned her psychology degree from Yale University and a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in child and adolescent development. Currently, she serves as the department manager of integrative services and complex pediatrics at Kaiser Permanente, Colorado. Dr. Maikovich Fong is passionate about youth mental health and particularly about empowering parents and caregivers with the skills needed to build long lasting positive relationships with their children and to navigate the many stressors that come with parenting. Dr. Maikovich Fong is also a proud parent of a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. It is a pleasure to have you here today. I'm so glad to have you contribute to Nobody's Perfect community, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the honor of being here. I'm excited for our conversation.
As we were preparing for this call, I was really excited about, not only the credentials you bring to the table, the wealth of experience that you have. And, as you and I have discussed, the show is really about educating parents and those that support youth around the things that are really impacting them today to help them better navigate kind of the ups and downs in life. And one of the things that we both agreed upon very quickly was this role that technology plays in young people's lives and how crucial it is to kind of the socialization and development we're seeing in today's world, but that it's also having a pretty significant impact often on their mental health. I guess the question starting out just kind of at a high level is how do we start having different, healthier conversations around the integration of technology and how to do that successfully with our youth to better support them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a very complicated question, right? And I think it starts with the acceptance that technology is here and it's here to stay. I think that that's actually really an important foundation from which we can start this conversation because I think like with anything that may impact mental health, we can channel it productively or it can be really something that is quite damaging. And so I just anytime I start a conversation with anyone about something as again complex as mental health, I like to remind people that nothing or very few things are all bad or all good.
Right.
I think that really, as you said, it's about empowering parents to really understand the potential benefits and negatives of technology. And then we can start to have a conversation about things like setting limits, about things like educating youth to make smart choices. And something I feel very strongly about is how to empower youth and parents to have a safe and trusting relationship where if kids get themselves in trouble, if they end up in an unsafe situation with technology, they know how to ask for help. And so that's where I would start that conversation is to ensure that we are recognizing it's complex, that we are avoiding really stringent black and white thinking, and that we are thinking about how to integrate, I think is the key word, something as nuanced as technology into our adolescents and kids' lives in a way that minimizes the risk and potentially maximizes the benefit.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is such a complicated conversation, and I can imagine as it comes up probably over and over for you in working with families, navigating those waters is really difficult, especially since this is not just a youth challenge. Adults are also, facing challenges with managing their own boundaries around technology use and et cetera. Like, what barriers do you push against as you start having these conversations with people? Because I really want to get into kind of the nuts and bolts about how do we do this in a healthier way. But I think one of the first things to acknowledge is as adults, we're also struggling with many of these same things as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I think that it is impossible to separate, first of all, on a high level, youth mental health from parent mental health, and
Right.
then at a nuanced level, youth use of technology from adult use of technology. I think that, we are told from the very beginning that we're our kids' first teachers, and that is absolutely true. And so it becomes very difficult to try to instill rules and limits and boundaries and values around something like a relationship with technology in our youth if we ourselves are modeling something very different. So I think asking ourselves the question you're asking me, which is, what's my relationship with technology, right?
Right.
What are my own boundaries with it? What are my own rules and limits that I'm following? And what are my kids seeing in terms of my relationship with it? That's a great place to start because, we lose credit very quickly as parents and become, are perceived, I would say, as very hypocritical if we are asking them to do something that is quite different than what they are seeing us doing ourselves when it comes to how we're using technology.
I agree, and, this "do as I say, not as I do" sort of thing only goes so far, and at a certain age, your kids are pushing back, and, we built this initiative, Nobody's Perfect Community, from a lot of research and a lot of data, working with, many kids, many adults, parent-aged adults, and really recognized, you know, if I had to put a word to what we experienced in having these conversations specifically around technology is for parents or caregivers specifically, there's a lot of fear around not knowing what my kid's doing or not being as advanced as they are on some of these technologies and not really knowing where to start the conversation. And then on the other side, I had kids that would say, I want to have these conversations with my parents, but they're not having these conversations. And there seemed to be this real disconnect between um, before we even get into setting digital boundaries, like just even having the conversation to begin with. So, how do you see that playing out in your office when you're meeting with youth and their parents today? Like, how is that coming up more organically that kind of opens the door that you obviously can educate them around doing this in a different way?
Yeah. So I think, I always like to think about where do we have in common as what are our family values, right? So if somebody is coming in saying we are struggling with my kids' use of technology or we need help figuring out what those boundaries should be or what role technology should or shouldn't play, especially things like cell phones, social media, right? These are the biggies. Starting actually with a conversation that has nothing to do with technology and rather what is some of the foundational core values that your family knows it may want to aspire to. So I'm talking about things like connection, right? And again, getting really concrete with it. Well, we value family dinners, right? Or we value trust and honesty in our family.
Yeah.
We value foundations of health like sleep, right? And we'll talk about sleep and technology, I'm sure, at some point because it's absolutely critical when it comes to kids' mental health. So, thinking about forget the nuts and bolts of technology, but what are some of those core pieces that make our family strong, right? That are values or practices or rituals or habits or patterns that we hold near and dear. And then thinking about how is technology interfacing with those? So, an example of that, if a family says, and often you'd be surprised, kids agree that sitting down to family dinner is actually something they value as well, right? Okay, well, let's talk about what does it do if everyone's on their phone during that dinner, right? Well, hopefully we get to a conversation of it may be detracting from that value of connection. It may be detracting from this one time during everyone's busy day that we're able to sit down and talk to each other, right? So it's not necessarily what is the bad that the phone is doing in that scenario, but what is the value, what is the good that it's detracting from, right? So challenging people to think about, again, not the phone itself or the social media itself as good or bad, but what role is it playing in helping you align or not align with core values or with core tenets of your day or your week that you're telling me are important to you. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and what I love about it is this kind of foundation of connection and recognizing that that's a starting point of everything really, as humans that we require and need. But, what I love about what you've just shared with us, it's basically building rapport from that foundation of connection around kind of these shared values or things that we enjoy as a family that has nothing to do with the technology. I can see how that really kind of takes the bricks off the wall, so to speak, to where people then show up to the conversation differently of recognizing, oh, by doing this, it is actually maybe robbing us of the opportunity to connect in a way that we all enjoy, which to me seems like a really beautiful point to have a more fruitful conversation.
Yes, and I think youth in general, as most parents probably have discovered along the way, do better at following rules, even when they're clear black and white rules, when they have been collaborative or part of the conversation leading to those rules, right? So, what I mean by that is if it is a family decision that connection matters, if it's a family value that, yeah, we want to make sure we're able to chat with each other about the day or whatever it may be, then that rule, if you want to call it that, of no phones at dinner, if it's come about secondary to the family discussing and agreeing upon that shared value and acknowledging that in this concrete example, that phone is detracting from that shared value, that's going to be something that teens and youth are going to get behind a lot better than a very black and white, maybe what feels like authoritarian rule of you will not have your phone at dinner, right? And so that's going to be a theme I'm going to probably speak a lot about of how do we collaborate with teens. We're still the parents, right? They still look to us and need us to help set boundaries and help them make good decisions when maybe they're at risk of making poor ones. But if we can get to a point where it is a conversation, it's not just these are the concrete rules about your phone. I guarantee the sustainability of those patterns and the teen's ability to have a healthy relationship with technology long after they're out, even of the parent's home, is going to significantly improve if it's been a collaborative process that they feel part of.
Right. And what I love about that approach is it really puts some guardrails around how are we showing up as a family and then how it affects each person in the family structure. And what was also proven out in the data with the work that we've done with teens was, they really like having some structure around some of these
Yes.
things. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I guess moving the conversation forward, now we've had these conversations as a family that maybe we have a tech-free dinner, whatever it is you decide for your family. What do we move back into when people are back on their devices? How do we start setting digital boundaries? And especially as parents who maybe don't have great boundaries around technology themselves as well.
Yeah. And I think this gets to what you were saying a moment ago about whether they can articulate it always or not, teens need boundaries, right? And they're
And
not going
really
to on
probably actually want it, whether they'll put those words to
correct.
it or not.
Absolutely. It is much easier to say to a friend, I have to leave my phone plugged in downstairs when I go to bed. That's why I cannot text you back at 2 a.m. than it is to say, I really need my sleep, friend, right? You please do not text me in the middle of the night. It's
Right.
actually much more convenient for a teenager sometimes to let the rules or let the parents be the bad guys, right? To be able to kind of scaffold their ability to set boundaries. So I think, when you start talking about what are some of those digital boundaries, how do we help teens set them? How do we help our kids or set them for them when we need to? I think in my mind, it really boils down to a couple of things. It boils down to basic safety, and then it boils down to health and well being for the teen. So, I think starting with health and well being, when you look at the research out there, I always like to remind people first and foremost that correlation is not causation. Okay. And what I mean by that is we actually have quite a bit of data now that does link use of cell phones and social media to some mental health problems. That doesn't mean it causes it, right? It does mean that there's a relationship there. And when you dial down in that data, we do find a pretty specific correlation, and we're starting to get toward causation between use of cell phones and social media into the sleep into the night hours, I would say, right? So use of cell phones and certainly use of social media when kids are either supposed to be getting ready for bed or are supposed to be asleep. I get very concerned about that. I think the data there is quite clear. So when we start to talk about digital boundaries, one of the first things I would advise parents to really think about is those basic boundaries around when are you allowed to be on a device,
Okay.
right? I am a big advocate, very concrete recommendation of having a basket or something that is in a central location like a kitchen or a different room in the house that all people in the home, and that includes parents, place their devices in at a certain hour each night. right? Now, there may be exceptions if you're someone who's on call overnight and you've got to have access to your phone, or, you need to have it in case a family member calls. There's ways to modify that. But simplest boundary I can recommend is having a place that that phone is kept outside of the youth's room and outside of the adult's room, so that there cannot be any temptation to access it when we are supposed to be sleeping.
Well, and what I love about that is it really is a principle that's kind of built on a modeling foundation also. Like, I'm gonna do the same thing I'm asking you to do. And again, I
Yes.
know there are circumstances that may be adapted. But I think there's this element which, again, I go back to, really builds rapport and trust of, we're doing this together. What I hear a lot from teens is, "Oh, my parent wants me to do this," but, like, they're always on their phone, or, so I think there's a conversation that really seems to evolve when we start talking about technology, just from the similarities that we're seeing in adults and youth. I mean, and frankly, I think where the conversation is so different, for parent aged people, is we're adapters to technology versus youth. They've had it forever. It's, they're natives to it. So there is an understanding how some of these conversations have evolved into, I don't know what my kid's doing. I don't understand tech as well as they do. And I think that's scary. One of the conversations that I've been asked a lot, and I don't have an answer, with you as the expert, I'd like to ask, are there some recommended ages around introducing technology to your youth that are kind of guidelines or standards that you could share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I want to start with the caveat that I recognize there are different family circumstances that may make some of these recommendations not feasible, right? So if somebody has a child, perhaps even as young as 7 or 8, who may need to be spending some time alone at home, right, or is going to be certainly in situations of divorce or shared caregiving where people are moving between different homes and need to have regular and consistent access to the other parent, there may be excellent reasons to introduce technology quite a bit younger. In terms of overall recommendations, I would really encourage people to think a little bit about the biological age, but also about what I'm going to call the developmental age. Okay. And I draw a distinction there because kids at the same age may be at a very different stage developmentally. And
Right.
so instead of giving you an age, I'm going to give you a couple of developmental kind of milestones, if you will, that I would encourage people to think about if they're considering introducing something like a cell phone or allowing kids on social media. So, one of the biggest risk factors we have is that the second kids have access to a cell phone or social media, they are flooded with what I call unfiltered and uncontextualized information,
Right.
right? They are subject to misinformation. They are subject to potentially very scary things, some of which may be true, some of which may not be true. But if a child does not have the developmental ability, which some kids can develop as early as 10 or 11, and some it may be 15 or 16, if they do not have the ability to understand context, right? To question whether what they're seeing is something they should be seeing, whether what they're seeing is completely inaccurate, right? Whether what they're seeing is scary and something they need to tell a parent about, that's sort of that skill set that I want people to think about evaluating to the best of their ability in their kid when they're thinking about what technology, what level of technology to allow them to have, right? Because again, the technology itself, yes, we have some data on blue light. Yes, we have some data on just being on a device itself that can be problematic. But mostly what we're worried about is the content that they're seeing, and that's that skill set that I want people to think about. Would my child come to me if they saw something they shouldn't? Would my child have that cognitive ability to say, I don't think what I'm seeing is accurate, or I think what I'm seeing is dangerous. I better ask somebody about that. The second developmental ability I would think about is the ability to self regulate and have some impulse control. Now, even the most regulated 17-year-old or most regulated adult, to your earlier point, may have trouble putting that phone away, right?
Right.
May have trouble turning off social media. And we know that at certain developmental stages, people really cannot regulate impulsivity or regulate their time at all, right? And so that's, again, sometimes 11, 12, 13, we have kids that are really good at saying, Mom put this thing on my phone. When I've been on it an hour, it's going to shut off, right? And I know to put it away. And then we have kids that may be 14 or 15 with significant ADHD or impulse control or self regulation issues that may not be able to follow simple guidelines to keep them safe. And then, so for me, again, it's not so much about age, it's about, do we have those developmental abilities to contextualize, to seek help if they get themselves in trouble, and to have some ability to follow rules and regulate impulses. That for me is more important than the biological age of that child.
And I think that that is so important, and that key differentiator there is especially that developmental piece is just recognizing that kids age differently, they progress differently, they have different maturity levels at different ages. I think that those are some really wise key points to really focus on the biological age and the developmental age. I guess the question that's coming up for me is like, say I've given my kid a device and I recognize fairly quickly that, oh, we probably shouldn't have done this yet, or there were things that we
Yes.
didn't expect that have happened. How do you walk that back?
Yeah. Well, I would say what an excellent teaching moment for your child, because throughout the rest of their life, they're going to make decisions that they're going to realize were the wrong ones, right? And so to be able to model, I'm a very transparent parent. I recommend transparent parenting, and what I mean by that is not um, kind of beating around the bush, right? To be able to say what you just said to me, which is, hey, buddy, right? Like, I made this decision because we thought we were at a stage where this was the right decision, right? We thought you were ready for this phone, or we thought you were ready to have a Facebook account, or whatever it may be. Here's the things I'm seeing that are making me realize I think we made the wrong decision, right? I am seeing that you're not able to leave that phone in the basket at night because I saw you, snuck down and got it after that. Or I'm seeing that you saw some things online that really gave you quite a few nightmares actually for the next few nights, or whatever it may be. So I think naming that it was a mistake, giving some specific examples that are making you feel that way, and then partnering with the child to say, now what do we do? Right. And maybe that answer is, we put this away for another year and we reevaluate in a year. Maybe this is, we're going to have 20 minutes a day, right? Where you can go on this while I'm sitting next to you, and we're learning how to safely navigate the internet together, or whatever that solution you came up with may be. But I think, again, we're going to lose kids really quickly if we just say, I'm no way, this was a terrible decision I made, you weren't ready for this, it's going away. We have to explain to them why, right? What we're seeing. And again, they may not agree, but anchoring that in love for them, in care and concern for them. One of the things I sometimes say to kids is, I would much rather that you be furious at me as a parent than I end up having you in a really unsafe situation and you're happy with me because you got your phone, right? But you're in a really dangerous situation. So it's okay that you're mad at me. I can handle that. I can tolerate that. This is why I'm making this decision.
Well, and
Having our kids mad at us is not the worst thing in the world.
right, and what I'm hearing for you is there is a real compassion in this collaboration.
Yeah.
While it's owning your role and recognizing that, hey, maybe I empowered this conversation and integrating this tool earlier. And what I have found a lot of times, if you're willing, a parent that's willing to have those conversations with your teen will often admit and acknowledge the things that they recognize that they're struggling with, maybe different, look different, but it can get to the same outcome of recognizing this isn't probably the healthiest thing for you.
Right.
You know, I love kind of the practical approach that you're sharing with us that I think comes back to, really as a parent, like showing up and having some kind of real practical conversation, and recognizing you may do it the wrong way, you may screw it up, you have the opportunity to go back and clean that up if you do. But really, putting your kids' safety first and foremost is really kind of paramount to all of this. And there are instances where maybe we've allowed something to happen sooner than it should have, and we recognize in hindsight that that was not a great decision. Like there's a way to clean that up too, it sounds like. um, I think the thing that I'm also really curious about that I know you and I had discussed in advance of this was you know, growing up, if somebody wanted to bully you or have access to you, like they had to come to your house or they had to call your home phone. Like in today's world, there's kind of this, if you don't have good boundaries in your home and your youth has their phone all the time, like people have unlimited access to our youth today, which can
Yeah.
also have some significant negative consequence to their mental and perhaps physical safety sometimes as well. Like, how do you navigate when we're talking about boundaries, this conversation around setting better boundaries with peers? Because we know that peer support is a huge part of like socialization today, but that doesn't always go so well.
Yeah. I think that is actually one of the most frightening things to me about teens and youth use of technology in the current day is this idea of cyberbullying, and even if it doesn't reach that point, um, just misuse, I would say, by peers of technology in ways that can really impact youth mental health. And I think the answer I'd have for you is a couple fold. One, in an ideal world, we are teaching youth how to set boundaries, right? We are teaching them how to say no to whatever's happening online that may not be appropriate, right? Or how to kind of set those boundaries for themselves. I also think I'm a realist, and not all kids are going to be able to do that. It is very difficult to set boundaries with peers, right? And so there are times that we as the parent need to be the one to say, I'm setting this boundary for you. That may look like I said, you do not have your phone after this time of day. It may look like I'm putting an app on your phone, or I'm connecting your phone to my phone such that I can, and I'm going to be very transparent with you. I'm not going to be sneaky about it. I'm letting you know I can see every text message that comes in. I can see messaging back and forth through social media. I'm not going to be constantly watching to see what's happening, right? And I want to be really transparent with you. I am going to periodically review your messages or see what's happening, not because I'm overprotective or I don't trust you, but because I am a realist and know that, things can be happening sometimes that you may need some support navigating and may not know how to handle. And so I think when it comes to helping teens set those boundaries, quite frankly, that's what I mean by sometimes we have to set them for them. I also think when you asked earlier about, you kind of implied, like, how do you know when your kid's ready for some of this stuff? That's one of those developmental skills that I would really think about and asking your teen. How would you handle it, right? If somebody was sending you something inappropriate through a text message or through social media, if somebody was bullying you, right? If they were saying horrible, nasty things, how would you handle that? What would you respond? And not testing your team, but having a conversation to say, like, these are real things that happen. I want to talk with you now when it's hypothetical, before it's really happening, about how you think you'd handle that. And seeing what their response is and kind of role playing and going through some of those scenarios. If they don't want to have that conversation with you, if they think that's annoying, if they say, oh, mom, don't be ridiculous, I would question, are they ready then to be exposed to that technology if they're not developmentally willing or able to engage in a conversation about how they would handle these situations that they very realistically may find themselves in?
Right. What I really appreciate about this conversation is the practical approach that's really built on this two-way communication, which we know has many fail points. Like, let's say that. I guess if I'm the parent and I'm hearing this and I recognize that like these are all great ideas, but I'm not comfortable having some of these conversations with my kids, or I don't know that I feel like I have the depth or the capacity to do this in a way that is going to be really fruitful and healthy. Perhaps we have some unhealthy dynamics at home. Like, how do you navigate those waters with people that just can't get there yet?
Yeah. Well, that's why people like me have a job. So I would say that this
Fortunately.
is a completely reasonable thing to seek some behavioral health support for, right? And I think I would first say to any of those parents who fall in that category that you're describing that this is not a failure for you as a parent. This is truly uncharted territory for most parents. To your point, our generation did not grow up as kids with all of this at our fingertips. And so we can listen to podcasts like this. We can read books, we can do all the things and still feel very ill-equipped to actually sit down and have a conversation with a teen who may want nothing to do with that conversation. And so this is actually an increasingly common reason that people will seek out consultation from a behavioral health provider who can help facilitate those conversations. You alluded to the fact that, there may be other things going on at home related to family dynamics or related to parent child communication challenges, that this can actually maybe start a bigger conversation about how do we communicate in our family.
Right.
right? How do we build healthy habits as a family? How do we, I know this is going to sound silly, but how do we fight fair, right? I mean, that is a skill to learn how to fight, how to argue in a way that is still healthy, right? And so my guess is, this is an area where if you're struggling with some of these conversations about technology, you may be struggling to navigate some of these other very complex areas of parenthood. And behavioral health providers can really provide facilitation for those conversations. They can help do some of these things I'm recommending, like try to identify shared family values, try to build those communication skills. This does not have to be something that parents are navigating alone.
Well, and that's what I'm hearing first and foremost from you is that you are not alone. And there are tools and there are resources and professionals that can help with this. And I also think about, every family structure is different. And, we've got divorced homes, we've got split
Mhm.
houses, like, and you may have a partner or a spouse or a loved one that sees this all completely differently and wants to do it a completely different way. So there's navigating that also. So I encourage anybody that's listening, if you're struggling to have this conversation with your kid or even with a significant other that's helping shape your kid's life and be a part of their life, like maybe having that conversation with them first and getting on that page together is the starting point. But, um, again, I just want to reiterate these are really complex things that we're all still learning how to integrate healthier skills with.
One other thing I want to just mention as you're talking, because I think it can be a little bit of a frame shift and a very helpful one for parents. And it kind of goes back to where I started that I think there are very few things that are all good or all bad, right? When it comes to mental health. I really would encourage anyone listening to think about the fact that, if you have a teen or a kid who is engaging in what we see as unhealthy behavior, so texting all night long, right? Or searching and scrolling the Facebook or the Instagram or whatever it may be for hours at a time, I think we can all agree those behaviors are not healthy. I also really encourage people to think about that most behavior, even the most maladaptive, is usually an attempt to meet some unmet need. Okay. So it may be that there is a kid who is struggling with connection. It may be that there is a kid who's feeling really lonely, right? Or a kid who is feeling very left out, or a kid who is having panic attacks or anxiety, or who's feeling very depressed. And they don't necessarily have the skill set to articulate that, to navigate that. And the way it's coming out is searching and scrolling and texting and doing all of these things in this attempt, even if it's not a healthy attempt to connect, to
Right.
find others who are maybe feeling the same way as them, to search for solutions, to pass the time, right? To quiet other thoughts that would otherwise enter their mind if they weren't mindlessly scrolling through the internet. And so I think that's the other just, I don't think warning's probably too strong of a word, but I guess just thought I would give people is there may be a reason or an unmet need underneath the behavior that you're seeing that you're not liking. And so by having again that collaborative approach, by approaching the conversation with curiosity versus just as the expert shutting down the behavior you're seeing, will likely, hopefully, yield a better conversation, maybe with professional guidance on how do we not just take away this thing that maybe is the only tool this kid has right now to deal with whatever they're dealing with, but identify what they're dealing with and help them find healthier ways
Right.
of meeting that need that they had. So I just want to throw that concept out there that most maladaptive behavior we see is an effort to cope with something.
Right, and differently put, I feel like it's that human desire that we all have to be valued, seen, and heard. So
Yes.
there is an element of this that, this may be showing up because something else is missing. I guess, for somebody who thinks everything's going pretty well in their home, are there warning signs or things that a parent could be looking for, or somebody that supports you, whoever's listening, that they might want to be looking for that there could be some negative consequences that are starting to emerge, or maybe building upon what you just shared that we should be aware of. Like,
Yeah, great question. So, when it comes to development and looking for warning signs, I always say that the first thing is some change of any kind, right? So, a kid that is normally active, less active. A kid that normally goes to bed at a certain time, you're seeing that light on under the door, right? Later and later at night. Now, certainly anyone who raises kids knows that it can be developmentally normal for them to spend lots of time in their room to kind of isolate, right? But increasing amounts of isolation are one of the biggest warning signs, I would say, at any age for youth. And then the other thing I would say is when you do set some sort of boundary, like, hey, we're now sitting down for dinner, let's leave the phone, right? Or we're going over to grandma and grandpa's house, we're not bringing phones today, or whatever it may be. If there is a really strong atypical reaction to that, right? Big protest, big concern about that, that can be a warning sign as well. But I think certainly looking for that increasing isolation, certainly looking for more and more time spent by oneself, and then certainly, like I said earlier, if you're spending time on your phone, that's time you're not spending on something else. So what is being replaced with technology? What are things they used to engage in that they're doing less of because the phone or the internet or whatever it is filling that space? Looking for those shifts in how time is spent is one of the ways that I would advise people to kind of be a good detective about.
That's good information, and we've talked a lot about what I would consider best practices here, like how to do this differently, how to do this well. What you touched on just a second ago is sort of those atypical responses. Like if you're seeing those atypical responses and you have a kid that gets really inflammatory or upset about, integrating some of these better coping skills around technology, better technology hygiene, where do you start there
Yeah.
if you've tried this and it's not going well, and you've tried again and it's
Yeah.
still not going well? Like,
Yeah.
go from there.
So I think, I think there's a couple things. Certainly, this would be a very good reason to seek some professional support, someone who can step in and work with you and the kid to say, here's the pattern we're seeing, right? How do we figure out some new structure, some new guidance around how we handle all this? And most importantly, what's going on underneath it, right? Is there some other behavioral health concern? Is this a kid who's struggling with depression or anxiety, like I said, that's showing up in this way? We want to get to the bottom of that. I think also, again, I'm hopefully by now a big advocate of collaborative parenting. Sometimes we can't collaborate because the teen or the youth is just not able or willing to do that. I then would suggest something like a technology contract. And I mean that actually in a very concrete way as a written document that goes through rules and guidelines for use of whether it's a phone or social media, or if kids have a gaming system set up where they're connecting with other kids over the internet while they're playing their games, but an actual contract that says these are the rules and requirements for being able to use this. Very specific, right? So not things like appropriate use, but define what does appropriate use mean. These are the hours that you can use. These are the hours. These are the types of things you can be doing. If the youth is not able to follow those, then what are the consequences that follow? Usually, we want direct consequence, right? So something that's related to the behavior. So in this case, it would be likely taking away the technology or
Mhm.
pausing the ability to use the technology for a period of time until they're able to follow those rules. Again, this is a life skill. There's very little we do in this world that doesn't come with some guidelines and rules, and there's consequences if we don't follow them. And so I see this not just as about the technology, but as about saying we need to teach this youth in this situation how to be able to follow rules and what the logical consequences are that come from that.
Well, and again, I'm putting myself in a parent perspective. If I don't wanna be seen as the bad guy, I'm putting that in quotes
Mm,
here. The reality is the tools that you're talking about here and having this collaborative, communicative approach with your youth really, aside from the conversation you're having it about at this moment in your home, the reality is these are good skills that foundationally, I think, set youth up for better success longer term in life. So
exactly.
while you may not want to have these messages with your youth necessarily, these conversations, I mean, there is another benefit to you are helping them succeed at other things in life as they move forward. So, there's almost an edict as a parent, like you can't really avoid these conversations if you want you can't have both and probably. There are going to be some conversations that may not be comfortable to have, but could really be the thing that sets your youth up for future success.
And again, I would go back to what I said to you earlier. It is not the worst thing in the world to have a teen who's mad at you, right? To have a kid that thinks you're the bad guy. I think far worse than that is getting in a situation where you have a kid who's really in a lot of trouble. They get themselves in a really unsafe situation. And so I think if it feels deeply uncomfortable to set boundaries as a parent, that's something to also think about with curiosity towards yourself, right? What is it that makes it so hard for me to say, here's your contract for your phone, right? Or here's the behaviors I'm seeing I'm really concerned about. We're going to do some things differently in this family. If that feels very, very challenging, think about why, right? What is it that is making it feel really uncomfortable to parent in a way that you're needing to, because your kid is showing you that they need more of that structure, more of that scaffolding.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's just so many landmines in this conversation, and I just again want to reiterate, as a parent or a supporter of youth, you are not alone. Like, and these, all things considered, this is all new. Like, we're all integrating and adapting to this. And again, it's not necessarily a youth problem. I think it's a people problem. We are all probably more hardwired to detached, and that's being revealed in pretty surprising and profound ways because of this integration of technology. I think much of that's by design, but there are specifically related to your youth's mental health. I mean, some of these conversations will absolutely shine a spotlight back on you, and owning your role and recognizing that you may have some work and improvement to do, I also think is a really great place to build rapport with your kids. To be able to say, hey, I realize I'm not a good model, and this is showing me that maybe I need to have better technology hygiene. Like, I think if you show up and own your role in the conversation, the likelihood of getting your kid to show up and meet you where you are is probably a lot greater. And frankly, again, I can't speak for everybody. I could speak for myself, and I am not a parent. But if I was, I would be needing to have these conversations with myself also, because I spend too much time online as well.
Right. And I think all of us do, right? And I,
Right.
I think having humility as a parent, having the ability to model, like we said earlier, hey, I made a poor choice, right? Or I think I thought about this incorrectly. I think we need to sort of change how we're approaching this. That itself is modeling such an important life skill, right? If you have a kid who makes a poor choice, they succumb to peer pressure, they do something that they got themselves in deep water about, you want them to be able to say, to their friend, to you as the parent, to a teacher, to somebody, I screwed up, right? I made a mistake. I made a choice that I wouldn't have made again. And most importantly, I need help kind of figuring out how to get out of this situation, or I need to change how I'm approaching this. That is the skill I want all kids to have, to be able to say, I made a mistake, help. Right? That is a huge takeaway, I would say, from this conversation, that you want a relationship with your kid where if they broke your rule, right? If they went on their phone late at night, or if they used that app you told them they weren't allowed to use, and they got themselves in trouble and they're in a situation they don't know how to get out of, someone is bullying them, someone has a photo of them and is threatening to make it public, whatever those nightmare scenarios may be, you want to have a relationship with your kid, where they will come to you and say, I broke your rule, right? Or I made a mistake. I really screwed up. Can you help me? Right? And I think that is one of the biggest gifts you can give your kid, is the knowledge that no matter what mistake you make, no matter how much you screw up, you can come to me. I'm going to probably be mad, and I'm in this with you. We will figure it out together.
Well, and in a perfect world, that is the direction we want to go. But I think the more we practice these skills and this modeling, the likelier we are to get to those conversations where you have this
Exactly.
rapport that looks like, hey, I screwed this up and I need to begin again. Like, I think there's real value in recognizing that some of these conversations you're likely going to have over and over. you know
Exactly.
what we've heard a lot about, and we've kind of talked about technology writ large, because the looming presence of a device is prevalent everywhere. But I've heard a lot of parents want to restrict social media and say, we just want to keep our kids off social media. Like, that's the thing that we've decided to do here, as to answer these questions. What do you think about that? Like, is that a
Yeah.
healthy approach when we're having these conversations?
So I think the first thing I'd say is that if you have made that decision for your family, I'm not going to question that. I think that if you have a good reason for doing that, there's probably a good reason for doing it. The one thing I would say, and I think this is really important, I want people to hear, is that whether it's social media or soda or anything else, right? Natural, completely healthy developmental tendency in kids is to push boundaries, right? And when something is 100% off limits, even the most well adjusted, healthy of kid is going to want that thing, right? And so going back to what I said previously, when I see kids really get in the most dangerous, what I called nightmare situations when it comes to social media, it's usually when they've accessed something that they were told they weren't allowed to, but they know they're going to be in huge trouble if that comes to light because they were told they 100% couldn't go on social media. They went on anyways. They're in trouble because of how the frontal lobe develops, right? They're not thinking about long term things. They're thinking about mom or dad being mad when they found out they broke the rule. So they don't go tell mom and dad, right? And they get themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into that bad situation. So I think if that, I generally am not a huge proponent of 100% you can never touch this thing because I think kids find ways to touch that thing, right? And then not have the skill set to be able to navigate it safely. I'm usually more a proponent of saying when you've decided it's an age that you feel comfortable with your child having social media, put in safeguards like link their account to your account, like I said earlier, so you can see everything that's coming and going, have really intentional conversations about what they're seeing. Maybe they access social media when you're with them at the beginning. But if you are going to have a policy where you 100% simply can't be on social media, to the extent that you can, really work in any way to build that relationship where if they access it, because I hate to say it, they probably will, and they're in trouble, they know they can come to you, right? And that's my biggest fear with any kind of absolutely not to social media approach is I've just seen so many kids access it through the friends accounts. Like you said earlier, they're better than we are at all this technology stuff. They find a way to create their account anyways. um, if you are going to have a policy like that, really help your kid understand why, right? Help them understand whatever that value is or that concern is that you're anchoring that policy in. So that it doesn't just feel like sort of this thing they're being told they can't do that all their other friends can. Help them understand your decision making around that. I think that's also really critical.
I love that. This has been such an insightful conversation, and I'm gonna say I think the primary takeaway is around collaborative conversation, recognizing you're not alone, having
Yes.
collaborative conversation with your kids, being able to recognize if you maybe gave permission to something sooner than you should have, and then to walk it
Yes.
back. Like, I just think there's a lot of thoughtfulness to the conversation that we had today. So thank you for your guidance and advice. I find it's really valuable to hear from an expert on what you're seeing with parents and youth today, and again, just recognizing you're not alone.
Absolutely. Reach out to your fellow parents, right? We're parents are a special knit community, and usually, if you're struggling with something, somebody else is as well. Reach out to professionals. I love your message of the name of this podcast. Nobody's perfect, right? I think that nobody's perfect when it comes to any of this stuff, and that's not a bad thing. So yes, no one is alone in this. Everyone is navigating it. We'll probably have different advice 5 to 10 years from now as the research continues to emerge. But really appreciate just that you're focusing on this really big topic, and love the connections we've drawn between technology, but then those bigger life skills that kids can gain through how you're helping them navigate this one facet of their life.
And frankly, what you've shared with us today is so valuable for those developmental pieces in building healthy young adults, which I think is the goal for all of us. You mentioned nobody's perfect a minute ago. One question I always like to ask before we wrap up is, what does nobody's perfect mean to you?
Yeah, I love, like I said, I heard the name of this podcast a while back and thought, what a perfect title, because I truly believe that there is no such thing as perfection. I know that might sound trite, but one of the things I know as a psychologist, is that a lot of anxiety and depression is anchored in comparisons we make between how we see ourselves and how we think we're supposed to be, right? And so if we have this idea of perfect, is that smiling, f- you know, all those people smiling in on an Instagram photo of the party I didn't get invited to, that's going to create so many feelings, right? So much anxiety, so much depression. So to me, nobody's perfect is simply the statement of truth, which is that if you're comparing yourself to somebody else that you think is perfect, one, you're wrong, right? And two, you're doing exactly what psychologists know is most likely to trigger long-term stress and distress. And so acknowledging that whomever you are, however you're functioning in this giant messy world that we're in is truly enough. And we can always improve. We can always reach out for support, but the goal is never perfection. Right. The goal is to be the best version of yourself you can and to navigate this world with as much, grace and skill, which is going to look different one day to the next. So I think it's a complete false narrative that there is anything close to perfection, and that the second we give up that idea, we do ourselves a whole world of good.
That's beautiful. Well stated. Dr. Maikovich-Fong, I want to thank you for being here and contributing to this podcast. I've learned things from you today. I think you've offered some practical guidance and support to things that parents and caregivers are navigating, and it's a timely message. And um, I just want to thank you for being here. It means a lot.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for being part of the Nobody's Perfect community, dedicated to supporting, inspiring, and empowering youth and families. We hope you enjoyed today's transformative conversation. Together, we are dismantling stigma and providing solutions for mental health and well being challenges so everyone can thrive. Join us every other week on cozy101.com/imperfect or on your favorite streaming platform to continue embracing our shared human experience. If you or somebody you know is struggling with mental health, visit nobodiesperfect.community to get immediately connected to a hub of clinically approved mental health resources and tools designed to support you wherever you find yourself on your journey. And be sure to follow at Nobody's Perfect Community on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm your host, Jason Hopkins. It's been a pleasure having you here. Stay connected, stay inspired, and remember, nobody's perfect because perfection isn't real. Your story is. Until next time.